Now let's talk about assessments. The analytics coming out of previous years is that a lot of students do go and watch this particular segment on assessment. This is where do you get the marks? Well, there are a couple of assessments. The one that seemed to cause the most fuss are the presentations. As I said, these have now been changed to a peer collegial critique, and you'll be encouraged to learn how to do a critique, both as a presenter, here's my work, can you examine it, and as a critique, as a critic. That is, I'm looking at someone else's work and my job is to try and determine whether it can be improved. There are 3 of these. The first one is in week 4, if I have it right, and this will examine your understanding of the requirements. So by week 4, you have to have some idea of how you're going to express the requirements and to have something there to try and persuade another team that you've understood the requirements and you've got them under control. And they in turn will try and determine whether this could be improved. I can imagine that the first time up is really going to be we thought of something you haven't, or we've expressed it differently, better, or something like that. So we'll get over that. The mid-semester review is going to be reviewing the design, because after the requirements you get the architecture, the database design, and the user interface design. So by mid-semester we'll have the design and we'll be able to review the design. Now, I haven't decided yet whether it's going to be just one of those or a combination of those. Probably one of them, and quite probably the user interface design. Then there's nothing more until the end of the semester, and it's I think it's the second last week of the semester, when you're going to be presenting all of your work to try and determine whether the stuff is, whether it's ready for delivery. And that again is a peer critique, and you'll be trying to persuade them, or trying to determine whether the system and the documentation is in a fit state to be delivered. Can it be maintained? Can it be supported? Can it be implemented? Can it be used? And by now that's you'll be getting pretty good at critiquing, so that'll be good. Now, peer critique problems. Nothing causes more complaints, I guess, than this in past years. There's a few reasons for that. One is that you're not accustomed to being assessed by your peers. You're much more accustomed to being assessed by some authority figure who says, here's your mark, and sit down and be quiet. Well, in the industry, this is not going to happen. Your superior probably doesn't know enough about exactly what you do or that particular domain to give you good advice and say what's right or what's wrong. It is going to be your peers to whom you turn for advice. So starting here, this is what you start to do. Now, we acknowledge that the first few times that people do a critique, there is a certain amount of bias in it, and a certain amount of you're not as clever as us, and things of that nature. So what we do to try and compensate that is that the tutor will be looking at the reviewing team and the reviewing team's comments, and we'll be assessing those. Right? So we'll get an idea of how well they assessed you. And the depending how well or badly they assess you, you get some marks back. And there's quite a complicated formula that goes. It's not a complicated formula. It's quite a simple formula, but it's a mouthful to try and explain it in words. But you're compensated for a poor review, and you are punished for a bad review. Now, my comment there is, I don't enjoy people pointing out my mistakes either. I'm a geek, and I'm pretty conscious of I want to be perfect. I want to, I want to blitz the whole thing, and I just do not like it when I've made a mistake. Well, I've had long enough to get used to it. I still don't like it, but I'd rather have somebody point out my mistake early, when it's more or less private, and I can fix it more or less in private. It's really hard after it's been published and somebody points out a mistake. Now you have to publicly admit a mistake, and that's difficult. Now I do this each year because invariably I put out some announcement or other and I've got the date wrong, or I've got the word wrong, or I've sent it to the wrong group, and there's, I've got to put out a second one, an apology, and that's embarrassing. So it's better to get it reviewed. Deliverables, as I said before, these will be marked by your tutor. They do have a marking scheme. You will have the marking scheme. So there should be no surprises. The marking scheme should tell you what's expected, and you should be able to assess your own work on that marking scheme and get a pretty good idea of what marks you should earn. Now that's the marking scheme for all the deliverables, and the system itself. There will be a test specification published, and tell you exactly what it is expected to do at a minimum. And there's a certain amount of discretion for the tutor to mark you up a bit for some really good work. Now, what gets marks? Well, first thing you've got to do is you've got to produce it, okay? And whatever it is, it's got to be fit for purpose. So if it's the requirements or the architecture or the designs, they actually have to be a design of the thing it's supposed to design, and the tutor could look at it and say, yeah, basically it works. It will achieve its objectives. It will provide what it's supposed to provide, and it works. Right? If you do that, that's 3 out of 5. That's a pass mark. Okay? If there is something wrong, missing, or deficient about it, it'll be a 2 out of 5. If it's a minimal effort that is barely there, but you've done something, it's a 1 out of 5. And if it's missing entirely, it's 0. To get a 4 out of 5, you have to say just how that deliverable provides its required functionality, or it provides how it does what it's supposed to do, and then how it meets the objectives of the major stakeholders. Now, you get to say who are the major stakeholders, and you get to say what their objectives are. Having said that, you then, with your deliverable, you have to say how that deliverable meets those objectives. Now, if you can do that, that's 4 out of 5. Okay? Because that demonstrates a greater understanding of what you've done and why you've done it, than if you simply do it. Okay? You just do it and produce something and it's pretty competent. Cool. That's 3 out of 5. That's competent work. 4 out of 5 requires you to demonstrate to the tutor and to me that you know what you've done and why you've done it. Now, work of high distinction is where you can do that not only for one solution, but for at least one more solution, at least one more. Frequently with software development there are several different ways of doing something. For example, if you're doing the software requirements, you could express these as narrative clauses, you could express them as user stories, you could express them as use cases, you could put them in a spreadsheet, or you could put them on Jira tickets. So there's several different ways of doing it. Now, for high distinction, you'd have to pick 2 or 3 of these and describe to me how that records all of the functionality and how that meets all the objectives of the stakeholders, for 2 or 3 of them. Then you have to say why the alternative you've chosen works best, and to show that it does. It scores more on all the criteria. That is work of high distinction. Now, similarly, we look at how you're running the project, and there's a similar marking criteria for that. But believe me, work of high distinction should, you really should should have to demonstrate you really know your stuff. The developed software, essentially by the time you get to the end, because this is a subject more concerned with software engineering than it is with programming, the criteria for the software itself is not that high. It has to do what it's supposed to do and not crash and deliver a reasonable working system. But beyond that, we're not very concerned.